The wind howled through the jagged cliffs of the Yellowstone River Valley, carrying with it an ancient, mournful cry. Claire stood at the edge of Sacrifice Cliff. The town of Billings shimmered faintly in the distance. She had heard the legend, how 2 Crow warriors, stricken with grief after a plague decimated their tribe, rode their horses off the cliff in an act of ultimate sacrifice. Locals said their spirits still lingered, trapped in an endless cycle of sorrow. As Claire stepped closer to the edge, she noticed a sudden stillness. The wind that had been whipping her hair moments before had vanished. She turned to look behind her. The trail she had followed up the bluff was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, pressing down on her like a weight. Then she saw them. At first, they were just faint outlines, barely visible against the twilight. 2 figures on horseback, motionless, silhouetted against the fading sun. Claire blinked. She was convinced it was her imagination, but the figures remained. They stood side by side, their heads bowed as if in mourning. The horses snorted softly. The sound was so clear it was as if they were standing right beside her. The figures began to move, their horses stepping closer to the cliff's edge. Claire's breath caught as she watched, frozen. The riders moved with purpose, their forms becoming more solid with each step. When they reached the precipice, they stopped. The lead rider turned his head, and though his face was shrouded in shadow, Claire felt his gaze pierce through her. A sudden gust of icy wind swept over the cliff, forcing her to shield her face. When she looked back, the figures were gone. The only sound was the distant rush of the river below, but the weight of the moment lingered. Claire stumbled away from the edge, her legs trembling. She glanced back one last time and thought she saw faint impressions in the dust where hooves might have been. When she finally reached the base of the bluff, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world cloaked in deep blue shadows. Claire looked up at the towering cliff, and for a brief moment she thought she saw the figures again. 2 riders etched against the stars, standing vigil in eternal silence. She whispered a silent prayer of respect before turning away, the weight of the legend now part of her own story. The wind howled through the Nebraska plains, carrying with it a biting chill that settled deep in the bones. As dusk fell, Emily and her friends drove their old pickup truck down a gravel road that seemed to lead to nowhere. Their destination was infamous among locals, Hatchet House, a decrepit, boarded-up structure that loomed like a dark shadow against the horizon. Legend had it that a brutal crime had taken place there decades ago. A reclusive farmer, driven mad by isolation, had turned on his family with a hatchet one stormy night. The story went that the house was cursed, and those that entered would hear the echoes of the farmer's rage, the thud of the weapon, the screams of his family, and the whispered regrets of his ghost. The truck stopped at the end of the road, headlights illuminating the house. Its windows were broken, and the roof sagged with the weight of decay. The group approached cautiously, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. The wooden door creaked open with little resistance, revealing a darkness so thick it felt alive. Emily noticed the marks on the wall first, deep gouges as though something sharp had been swung with violent intent. She shivered, recalling the stories. In the corner of the room, a broken mirror reflected their light back at them in fractured pieces. Suddenly, the air changed. A low thudding sound began, faint but rhythmic, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It seemed to come from upstairs. Her heart pounded as she froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The sound grew louder, closer. The floorboards above groaned as if something was moving. And then a loud crash sent the group running. Emily glanced back as they fled, catching a glimpse of something, an indistinct figure standing at the top of the staircase, outlined by the dim moonlight through a broken window. They didn't stop running until they reached the truck. As they sped away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that legend wasn't just a story. The gouges, the sounds, and the shadowy figure weren't figments of imagination. Something, or someone, still lingered in Hatchet House. Matt drove his rusty sedan down the desolate road leading towards the perimeter of Area 51. He wasn't supposed to be there. Warning signs had made that clear, but curiosity had a pull stronger than reason. As he approached the barbed-wired fence that marked the edge of the restricted zone, his headlights revealed a barren landscape. No guards, no cameras, just a lonely desert under the weight of secrets. Matt parked his car, stepped out, and scanned the horizon. The air was still, unnervingly so. He climbed the fence, careful not to snag his jeans on the wire. Once on the other side, he felt an almost tangible shift, as though he'd crossed into a place where the rules of reality were different. Half a mile in, he saw it, a faint pulsing light just beyond a ridge. Matt's pulse quickened as he crept closer. Peering over the crest, he saw a metallic structure, sleek and otherworldly, bathed in an eerie glow. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a stark contrast to the mundane secrecy of military compounds. Then the light intensified. A high-pitched hum filled the air, growing louder and sharper. Matt instinctively ducked, shielding his eyes. The desert lit up as though it were daytime, and when he dared to look again, he saw something rise from the structure. It hovered smooth and silent, defying gravity. The craft tilted slightly, and for a moment, Matt swore it was watching him. Without warning, the object shot into the sky, disappearing in an instant. The desert was plunged back into darkness, the silence now deafening. Matt stumbled backwards, heart pounding, before sprinting to his car. Before he could get there, a black SUV rolled up, its doors opening in unison. Men in unmarked uniforms stepped out, their faces obscured by shadows. Matt raised his hand instinctively, but the men didn't speak. One of them reached into his pocket, pulled out a small black device, and held it towards Matt. Matt woke up hours later. He was back on the main road. His car was parked neatly, the engine running, but the memory of what he saw and the unsettling emptiness in his mind where details should have been left him with chilling certainty that he had seen something he was never meant to know. The small town of Henniker, New Hampshire lay quiet under the pale light of the moon. Jennifer had heard the tales of ocean-born Mary all her life, the legendary woman born on a pirate ship and later rumored to haunt the old colonial house where she had once lived. But tonight, standing before the house's weathered facade, Jennifer felt a strange pull, a need to know if the stories were true. Jennifer pushed open the creaking iron gate, stepping into the overgrown path that led to the front door. The door was slightly ajar, and as Jennifer pushed it open, the musty smell of aged wood and forgotten memories filled her senses. Her flashlight revealed a grand staircase at the center of the house, its banisters polished, smooth from centuries of use. She had heard that Mary's ghost often appeared on the staircase, descending slowly, her green silk gown shimmering in the moonlight. Jennifer wandered deeper into the house, her steps cautious on the creaking floorboards. The parlor held a large fireplace, its hearth blackened with soot. Above it hung a portrait, a woman with piercing green eyes and a regal posture. Was this Mary? As she studied the painting, a faint sound echoed through the house, a rustling like fabric brushing against wood. Jennifer froze. She turned her flashlight towards the staircase, and there it was, the faint outline of a woman descending the stairs. Her figure was faint, translucent, and yet undeniably real. Her ghostly figure moved with an unnatural grace, her gown trailing behind her as if caught in an invisible breeze. Jennifer's heart pounded, but she couldn't look away. The woman paused at the foot of the staircase, her face tilted as though listening for something. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, the figure vanished, leaving the room eerily quiet. Jennifer stood rooted in the spot, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and slamming the front door shut behind her. Jennifer fled, her footsteps echoing in the empty night. Later, she recounted her experience. She couldn't shake the feeling that ocean-born Mary wasn't an angry spirit, but a watchful presence, bound to the house she had once called home. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey were unnervingly quiet that night, save for the rustle of branches swaying in the wind. Kevin trudged through the dense woods, his flashlight casting long flickering shadows across the uneven ground. He had heard the stories of the Jersey Devil, a monstrous creature with bat-like wings, glowing red eyes, and hooves, but he didn't believe them, at least not until his curiosity drove him to these woods alone. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, sharp and deliberate. He swung the flashlight towards the sound, but the light revealed only tangled trees and thick underbrush. As he moved forward, the forest seemed to shift around him, the path disappearing into darkness. Then came the sound, a shrill, blood-curdling screech that echoed through the trees. Kevin froze, his pulse pounding in his ears. The stories spoke of that scream, the terrifying call of the Jersey Devil. He swept his flashlight wildly, the beam catching something just beyond the tree line. 2 glowing red eyes stared back at him, unblinking. Kevin's throat tightened as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. The creature stepped forward, its form emerging from the shadows. A twisted, otherworldly figure with leathery wings outstretched and gnarled, claws gripping the forest floor. Kevin stumbled backwards, his flashlight shaking in his grip. The creature tilted its head, its eyes locked on him. Then, with a powerful beat of its wings, it took to the air, the force of the wind knocking Kevin to the ground. He looked up in time to see its silhouette against the moonlight, its scream piercing the night once more before it vanished into darkness. Kevin scrambled to his feet and ran, branches clawing at his clothes as he made his way back to the trailhead. The forest felt alive around him, every sound amplified by his fear. When he finally reached his car, he fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling. As he drove away, the woods receded into the distance, but the image of those red eyes and the haunting scream stayed with him. For the rest of his life, Kevin never ventured into the Pine Barrens again. Certainly that the legend of the Jersey Devil was far more than just a story.